Now on BBC News, it's time for Newscast.
So we're underway with Victoria, Derbyshire here, thank heavens. Vic, I've been trying to describe it as a news-narmy at the moment.
A news what?
News-narmy.
Okay.
It's like a
News tsunami.
Yeah, but it's difficult. It's obviously not the right word, but can you remember a time like it?
President Trump's first term, COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, this is non-stop right now. Every single day we are overwhelmed with new lines, particularly from the US administration, and maybe we're still adjusting to this new reality, like everybody is, actually.
As you will hear on this edition of Sunday's Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
Hello, it's Victoria in the studio.
And
it's Nick joining Vic and Paddy. It's a bit of a Newsnight reunion on Newscast. How's that?
you two spend more time in each other's company than your spouses.
That's absolutely true right now, I'm telling you.
What a privilege.
So the big story, I suppose, is that there's going to be an EU summit to which Sir Keir Starmer is expected to go in Paris.
Yes. An emergency summit, Nick. Why? What are they hoping to achieve?
Well, so Emmanuel Macron has convened this emergency summit, as you say, in Paris. It looks like it's on Monday, primarily the EU, but France is going to invite the only other big defence power in Europe, and that is the United Kingdom. And this is clearly in reaction to the declaration by Donald Trump last week that he had this long 90-minute phone call with Vladimir Putin.
In from the cold.
And that they are cooking up a plan to bring the war in Ukraine to an end without consulting Europe and with a question mark over how much involvement there will be for Ukraine in that. That has gone down very badly. We had some pretty choice language from a senior UK defence establishment source last week, Vic. So clearly they feel the need for an emergency summit.
You're hosting Ukrainecast as well as all of this. It's land for peace. It seems to be land for peace. It's in three words. The Americans are discussing.
Well, yes, that's what it would seem to be on the face of it. If you look at what President Trump said, if you look at what the US Defense Secretary said last week, but then a number of politicians have been pointing out to me, they've rolled back a little bit, they've rowed back, they've changed their language a little bit. I am genuinely confused about what is being offered, what is being negotiated. Do I believe Pete Hegseth on Wednesday? Do I believe what he said the next day where he rode back a bit? I don't know.
We do know that they're headed to Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
The American Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm.
But what we don't know, and I spoke this morning to James Waterhouse, the BBC's Ukraine correspondent from Kyiv, we don't know if Ukraine will be in the room.
That's right. And James was saying to you from Ukraine, reporting about how the Zelensky team have been in Munich and that they weren't told about it, and therefore they assumed that they weren't going to be there. And also, I got the impression from James that President Zelensky's view is, do you actually want to be there if you're being excluded from it? And that has caused such incredible shock across the European Union and in the UK, which had always been the case that any decisions that are made about Ukraine have got to involve Ukraine, whereas this seems to be a classic example of Donald Trump's approach to global diplomacy. It's the big guys that matter. It's me. It's President Putin. The big guys will make the decisions. Allies, who are they? We'll sit down in the room. Talking about denuclearization, Russia, China and the US, Europe, not interested.
And also, I mean, there is historically this role that Britain has had between Europe and the US. You can go back a very long time and find politicians of different parties playing that role. And it presents Keir Starmer with a moment in history. He himself has described this week as a once-in-a-generation moment for European security. And he finds himself at the head of a non-EU UK, just to use all those letters of the alphabet. I mean, did you ask, you've had a minister today, did you ask Jonathan Reynolds about this role? Because, I mean, it's of great interest what Keir Starmer's going to do this week.
Yes, and he used a phrase that I think we're going to hear a lot of, but this is what the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, said the UK could do over the next few days and months.
First of all, we should welcome the fact that the US president wants to see an end to the conflict. We all want to see that. Very much agree that has to include Ukraine. That is the position of the UK government. There will be no durable peace without involvement of European partners, particularly the Ukrainians, as part of that. What the US has said repeatedly, and has been a part of their programme for some time, is they would like to see Europe make a greater contribution to the collective defence of Europe. I think everyone recognises there is a reasonability behind that. So that is how Europe has to respond. I believe we in the UK can play a part as that bridge between the US and Europe as we adjust to this new era, and it certainly is a new era. But I think it would be wrong to portray this as some sort of fundamental breach. There is still a great deal of common ground between the US and its European allies. We must play our part in strengthening that.
So Johnny Reynolds inching on to Tony Blair's famous transatlantic bridge. The UK, as you say, Paddy, can be this bridge between the European Union and the United States. And the reason why that's happening is that Keir Starmer is going to this Paris summit on Monday. And then within the next 10 days or so, he is due to be seeing
the White House.
Donald Trump. So could he be that bridge? And the other thing that Johnny Reynolds was saying is that Donald Trump doesn't like the European Union. He's a bit warmer towards us. So can we play some sort of role? I do have to say, when Tony Blair went on about that bridge around about the time of the Iraq War, the European Union, they just don't like it. They don't like being told that they need the UK to tell them how to deal with the United States. And as the French like to say, who is the United States' oldest ally? It's not you, the UK, it's us, France.
I mean, that bridge is a bridge over troubled waters because you've got the same tariffs on steel headed our way, say the Sunday papers, says the British steel industry. It's not clear we're going to escape the tariffs directed at steel makers around the world. So you've got the tariff war, and events are moving so quickly. By the time Keir Starmer gets to Washington, D.C., there could have been a handshake between the American Secretary of State and the Foreign Affairs Minister from Russia.
Sergei Lavrov. And they have spoken. Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov have had a phone call. And as you say, in Riyadh, we could have had that handshake.
We had this question from Jenny, who was watching BBC One between 9 and 10 this morning, and she asks, I think politicians of all sides grossly overestimate the UK's influence with the US, especially under the President Trump regime. The UK risks being left in the middle with the US on one side and the EU on the other, and having little influence on either.
Yes, I mean, I love Jenny's question because it's something that I've considered since I was 19 when I studied US politics and the history. And, it's exactly what you go back and find. Every British Prime Minister has a question of how they deal with Europe and how they deal with America. And it's a timeless question. And one of the things I would say to Jenny, because I think she's nailed the fact that the Trump White House is disruptive and difficult to deal with, is that both Donald Trump and Elon Musk have an absolute fascination with the United Kingdom. Whatever else they've been saying, and J.D. Vance took aim at our freedom of speech over here, so it's not an easy ride. These are two people, Jenny, who are really fascinated by our royal family, our literature, our pop culture, and in the case of Donald Trump, his family history.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't Donald Trump say that his late mother Mary from Scotland, he's absolutely convinced that she went to heaven, but his father Fred Trump, who is the model of his approach to business, he's not quite sure whether his dad has quite made it to heaven. So Mary from Scotland, in Donald Trump's mind, is a bit of an angel. So there we are. Angelic influence from the United Kingdom.
So Prime Minister Keir Starmer has got to stand in the Oval Office and say something in primary colours that Donald Trump likes. He can't go to the White House and say, I'm the British Prime Minister. What a shame you're doing everything wrong, Mr. President. Everything wrong.
Well, and interestingly, the King of Jordan did exactly that. So very uncomfortable about Donald Trump saying, let's just clear out Gaza. And the King of Jordan sat next to Donald Trump and said, it's great to have you. You're fresh. You could be a man of peace. Then talked about how Jordan's going to take 2,000 children who have cancer or other long-term illnesses. And Donald Trump said, oh, that's marvellous, that's great here, what a beautiful gesture.
We have to keep in mind that there is a a plan from Egypt and the Arab countries. We're being invited by Mohammed bin Salman to discussions in Riyadh. I think the point is how do we make this work in a way that is good for everybody? Right. And obviously, we have to look at the best interests of the United States, of the people in the region, especially to my people of Jordan. And we're going to have some interesting discussions today. I think one of the things that we can do right away is take 2,000 children that are either cancer children or in a very ill state to Jordan as quickly as possible, and then wait for, I think, the Egyptians to present their plan on how we can work with the president to work on the Gaza challenges.
So I want to tell you,
excuse me, wait, just please. I didn't know that what you just said, 2,000 children with cancer or other problems, and that's really a beautiful gesture.
And then when the meeting was over and the King of Jordan was out of the White House, he then tweeted how he fundamentally disagreed with Donald Trump. So you've got to handle him with enormous care, but stick to your position.
There's a report in the Sunday Times today that I know you addressed on BBC One, and we like to bring all the Sunday journalism together. It was discussed on Radio 4 as well. And in summary, well, and actually you can summarise it perhaps, but it basically is as a row in Downing Street, again, between number 10 and number 11 over defence spending. So what's the story sourced, but do you think, by what's it saying?
Well, should we just say, so the headline says that Keir Starmer is going to overrule Rachel Reeves and ensure that we absolutely meet the 2.5% target of spending 2.5% of our GDP on defence. Now, in the government, they're all agreed that we should get there. The question is when? And Johnny Reynolds was talking about this to you, Vic, this morning, and he was talking about a roadmap to that. And you said, a roadmap? That sounds a bit vague. The Treasury want to go really cautiously because, Paddy, you were talking with your panel, Lucy Fisher, Henry Hill, about the very difficult fiscal situation that Rachel Reeves has. So Rachel Reeves wants to go cautiously, and the Sunday Times story is saying that Keir Starmer's put his foot down and is saying, we have just got to meet this by a clear date.
Well, because this is what I would like to predict, and it's worth saying I'm always wrong with my predictions on Newscast. We start from there. But it's useful in the news business to have a wrong clock. It's useful. I think Keir Starmer's got to have an announcement ready at the White House. I think if this is pitch rolling, it seems to me, defence spending, the roadmap could very well have it as first stop the White House on the map. Yeah. And then he stands there and he's got to say something like, today, last night we agreed we're going to go to 3% in 2025, 4% in 2026. What do you think about that?
Well,
bearing in mind I'm always wrong.
I can't imagine he can say that. I might be totally wrong. Because they've got to work out where the money's coming from. We've got the big spending review in March. There's every department. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, described it to me as, I think we're going to have the Cabinet Hunger Games. Every department is going to be fighting for more money and not to have cuts or efficiency savings. How can Keir Starmer say that about defence spending in the UK to Donald Trump?
I mean, Paddy's advice to the Prime Minister is very wise in terms of winning over the president.
Yes.
And it would be the equivalent of when King of Jordan said, we're going to take 2,000 very ill children from Gaza. And the president said, that's a beautiful gesture. So if Keir Starmer were able to set out a timetable of how our spending is going to ramp up, Donald Trump would love that, and that would earn us a huge amount of brownie points. But then, as Vic says, the challenge is the 26th of March, Rachel Reeves has got to give her spring statement next to the OBR, Office for Budget Responsibilities, spring fiscal forecast, which currently looks like she's going to fail to meet her fiscal rules. So if Keir Starmer suddenly announces a whole bunch of extra spending, that either means a whole bunch of extra cuts or a whole bunch of extra taxes, or, as your panel were talking about, changing the fiscal rules. So it would be challenging, Prime Minister.
A brave decision.
A brave decision.
Let's listen to the Business Secretary talking to Victoria.
Your government says it's committed to eventually spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. This week, again, US Defence Secretary said the US is no longer primarily focused on European security. When are you actually going to hit the 2.5% target?
Well, we'll set out the roadmap for that in the spending review. We've always made that commitment. I did have a substantial increase in defence spending in the last budget, £3 billion. We had the biggest pay rise for the armed forces in 20 years. Absolutely essential to tackling the recruitment of people into the armed forces.
You're going to publish a roadmap?
Yes.
A roadmap. So can you give us any indication of when
to the spending review for that? But
do you not think it's a bit more urgent?
Well, I think you have to do these things in relation to the other incredible pressures you have on public services and the health of the economy. But the need to generate the revenue is why we are so focused on addressing some of the difficult things the UK has avoided for a long period of time, to get the revenue in order to do that.
But what you see, how the Sunday journalism works is that the stories which land in the papers are a sign of what people are briefing out sometimes.
Yeah.
With respect to the journalism that's done. That's what, and the fact that the headline is that the Prime Minister is going to overrule the Chancellor, that's what the story is in the Sunday Times.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine this is pretty authoritatively sourced. I think I don't know who sourced it, but I think there'd be a clue. If you look on the Sunday Times, there's a picture of the Prime Minister in Downing Street having a meeting. I think it's Mike Burnett, who is the Mark Burnett, who's President Trump's envoy to the UK, who's originally from this country. And it's a picture of the Prime Minister on the phone at this dinner to Donald Trump. And just behind the Prime Minister, you can make him out, because you can tell by his glasses, is Morgan McSweeney, who is the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. I bet you that Morgan McSweeney is very, very keen to get to this 2.5% target on defence really quickly for two reasons. One, curry favour with the White House. Two, the big thing for Morgan McSweeney are the so-called hero voters. Those are those voters who abandoned Labour in the Red Wall and they came back to Labour because it was seen as strong, patriotic, strong on national security. That's the second reason why Morgan McSweeney, I bet, would love this to happen.
I've never yet, in the year we've done this, limped along with our Sunday newscast, I've never done it by glasses. You know, you can see the glasses in the corner of the picture. But I wonder, could it be for the Labour government, could this security crisis be what COVID was to the Conservative finances? The Conservatives were able to say, we're a very prudent political party, but we're going to borrow more than we've ever borrowed before and tax more than we've ever taxed before because of COVID. So you could imagine a world where we are talking about the chapter turning on European history. It would be appropriate for the Labour government to say to the British people, we are at a new historic crossroads. We're going to have to change the way we look at budgets.
Yeah, we're going to have to borrow billions.
Yes, just as I've changed my history.
Because our security is under threat and Russia is a huge...
But you can't do that within the current fiscal rules. So you're going to be changing your entire narrative of how you run the public finances. And maybe that's the right thing to do, but that's a sort of a difficult, brave Prime Minister. Prime Minister Paddy, it's a brave move, Prime Minister Paddy.
So if the fiscal rules were changed in order to borrow billions to increase our defence spending, do we think those hero voters would buy it? Do we think the Tories would buy it?
And the markets would
reform?
I think the calculation would be, I would imagine, in the Morgan McSweeney circle, and I genuinely don't know whether he's the source behind that, so I'm just genuine talking as an observer
of the glasses.
Is that in the glasses that, you know, the hero voters is what helped to deliver this Labour majority, so they would be happy with that. The problem is, if you set out incredibly tough fiscal rules and then you change them within a year of taking office, the markets would not be amused and the markets would say you're not serious. So that would be a very, very difficult thing to get through.
Previous chancellors of different political persuasions have changed the fiscal rules, haven't they? Regularly.
Gordon Brown famously, as they say, shifted the goalposts on his golden rule. George Osborne very cleverly had his fiscal mandate. And do you remember we always used to talk about what's plan A, what's plan B? What nobody realised was that plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E and indeed plan F were written into the fiscal mandate because it was assessed, this was a deficit balancing the current budget, it was assessed on a rolling 5-year basis, so you could never fail it.
Yeah.
It was, what are we going to do in 5 years' time? How's it looking in 5 years' time? Whereas Rachel Reeves, on her first fiscal rule, has given herself this incredibly precise target, which is no borrowing for day-to-day spending by 2029, 2030. That's it. And the danger for her is the OBR will say you are on course not to meet that. There's a second rule on investment where they've eased the way you measure debt to make investment potentially easier. But the first one is really strict.
So there is a corollary with all the countries of NATO that they've been told by Trump, one, that's 8 years ago, effectively, isn't it? Or 4 years ago, however many years it is. Yes, 8 years ago when he was
2016.
When he was new. Spend more, guys. And also, I may pull out. So they've had 8 years, these NATO countries, to be surprised, and they're claiming to be surprised now. Everyone I know is surprised, but their writing has been on the wall about what the United States thinks, what voters in the US think. Is it just possible for Germany to pay more for the defence of Germany than it currently is? And this is not a controversial view in the United States of America, and why Europeans haven't been listening to it is a question that I've been putting to the German ambassador to the UK, and he was very candid. He said we were mistaken. In Europe, we've not been taking this on the chin. So what you can say, and what bigger brains than me have said, is that division in the West is good for Putin. So what this ambassador is trying to do, difficult times though these are, he's pointing to the cooperative steps that there still can be in the next few days, which takes us back to where we began with the Paris summit.
That's right. And, Putin looks at the European Union. There are divisions. Viktor Orban in Hungary is much more much easier on Russia than France. There is a key element in Germany, Ostpolitik it was known as, which is that you've got to have a cooperative relationship with Russia. On that point about Europe not spending enough on defence, Donald Trump feels very, very strongly about this, that basically Europe has been having a free ride from Uncle Sam. I think he said...
No, it was J.D. Vance said, we are Uncle Sam, yeah. We're not Uncle Sucker.
No, that's right, but he was articulating what Donald Trump has felt very, very strongly. And I think he gave a very strong example a few years ago of how the United States pours loads of money into the defence of Germany against Russia, and then Germany has all these incredible deals on energy with Russia that then allows Germany to undercut the United States on lots of industry. And he says this is ridiculous. And there are members of the UK cabinet who feel very, very strongly that Donald Trump has a really, really important point here. But the key thing is, if, let's say, Prime Minister Paddy, with Donald Trump in the White House, said, yeah, we're going to put our defence spending up to 5%, that would not make any difference to our ability of what we could do in Ukraine if there is a peace that needs to be kept, because it will take years and decades to build up our capabilities. So if we're talking about increasing defence spending now, this is about being nice and trying to curry favour with President Trump. It won't make any difference on what we could do on the ground in Ukraine for quite some time.
And we've already heard in the last 24 hours warnings from Lord Danner, who was on Radio 4 yesterday, former head of the British Army, that we haven't really got the troops to be part of a peacekeeping force because it's a front line that is 1,000 miles long. And what can we offer? A few thousand? When you think about Gulf War I, how many did we send? 45,000, something like that? I mean...
Well, Vic, I was talking, we reported what this source from the UK defence establishment told me in the week, and we reported on Newsnight the sort of alarm about what Donald Trump was doing. And what this source was saying is absolutely at this point that our troops just simply aren't ready right now to do it. It's such a long border. And also, it is not realistic that you could think of having European forces trying to keep a peace in Ukraine without United States support. Now, there is a process that would allow the European Union, if it sends a force out, to apply for NATO support. It's known as Berlin Plus. I think that was negotiated in 2002. So the European Union under that could say to NATO, can we have this and can we have that? But that would mean US NATO assets. And if the US is saying none of our assets, the big problem is the intelligence that the United States can give from the sky, satellites and things like that. Absolutely vital. So when the United States was, quote, not involved in the action in Libya, their not being involved massive help from the sky. And if you haven't got that, this person was telling me it is very difficult to see how you could have a credible peacekeeping force in Ukraine.
So there we have the best efforts of the three of us to talk about some great scoops in the newspapers today, some broadcast interviews at this time of maximum churn. It feels a lot like a historic chapter's been turned within just days in our continent. And we know that newscasters are tuning in 7 days a week. So we say thank you very much to you listening, and please join Adam tomorrow. Goodbye.
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 Newscast from the BBC.